Good day, everyone. We're at the top of the hour and ready to begin our webinar titled Making Your Media More Accessible. I'm your host, Mike Lasecki. Thank you for joining us today. There are two interesting parts of today's interface. Number one, the chat window, which you're used to. Please use that window to ask questions of our presenters. And you'll see a closed captioning window, which is available to provide, of course, closed captionings for this webinar. Attendees using that window can adjust the font size and make the display suitable for them. Thank you again for joining us. Let me now turn our attention to today's presenters. It's my privilege to introduce our colleague Rachel Bauer. Rachel is Director and Principal Investigator of the Access ATE Project and the ATE Central Project at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Rachel, thank you for joining us today. Please introduce your co-presenters.
Thanks so much, Mike. As always, I'm thrilled to be here. We love to bring folks from the ATE community and others from beyond ATE these kinds of really interesting and exciting presentations. As Mike mentioned, it's live, and I'm just going to remind you all that you will get a copy of this emailed to you, so you'll be able to see the slides and go over them again if you're interested. I'm very pleased to have Madeline Rothberg and Brian Gould here with me. Madeline and I have worked together, gosh, I think we started working together probably 20 years ago. That's kind of disturbing, actually, to realize how long ago it was. She is the Senior Subject Matter Expert at NCAM, or the National Center for Accessible Media, and Brian is her colleague. So Madeline, why don't you say hello, just chat with folks for a minute, and then introduce Brian, or let him introduce himself.
Hi, this is Madeline, and at the National Center for Accessible Media, I focus on accessibility for STEM learning and also on standards for personalizing accessibility in education through standards-based approaches. And I'm thrilled to be here today. And I'll hand it over now to my colleague, Brian.
Thanks, Madeline. Hi, this is Brian Gould. I'm the Director of Accessible Learning and Assessment Technologies at NCAM, the National Center for Accessible Media, and a lot of my work and focus is on finding ways and implementing ways of making visual media accessible for people who are blind or have low vision.
Right. Well, thanks for introducing yourselves, and we're going to turn it back to Madeline and Brian in just a minute. But we want to learn a little bit about why you all are joining us. And someone had asked what ATE is, and I will be talking about ATE in just a minute and explaining a little bit more about the ATE program. But first we're going to have a poll. So Mike, if you can open that up. So we just would like to know kind of why you're interested in accessibility. Maybe you're new to it, want to just learn more. Maybe you have students with disabilities enrolled in your courses. The third option is you lead others who develop content, and there's an other button too, and if you'd like to if you click that other button, would you please share your info in chat and let us know. All right, so somebody said they're an evaluator. Tony said that they're an evaluator wondering how to address, I'm assuming, accessibility issues. All right, so just we'll see who else can. The biggest number of folks lead others who develop content, and then the second largest group is they're just new to accessibility and want to learn more. Somebody said, Amy said that she's done a lot of web development work in other fields, looking to bring more accessibility to her department. Norman, multimedia specialist, curious about accessible content. More for students. All right, so lots of folks are chiming in. Okay, so this is a nice array of different folks who have different reasons for joining us today. Okay, somebody's saying their programs are online. All right. Okay, thanks, Mike. So I want to just tell everyone a little bit, it'll be a reminder for some of you and new information for others about the ATE program. So ATE stands for Advanced Technological Education. It's a National Science Foundation funding stream with a focus on technician education. And what's really interesting is it's NSF's commitment to community colleges and workforce. It's really the only program at NSF that focuses on two-year institutions and program development at those institutions, professional development for those faculty. About a little over 300 projects and centers are funded currently across the U.S. And it's a true community, and one of the things that really makes it a community is that there are a sort of variety of cross-cutting support kind of baked into the program for community members. And Access ATE is one of those cross-cutting programs. Our goal at Access ATE is to really work with this group of community college educators to help them make the materials and activities that they're developing with NSF funding more accessible for all students and faculty, including those, of course, with disabilities. We're really looking to raise awareness and help folks understand more about the tools and resources that are available to them beyond the things that they may have on their campus. And part of our goal is to reach out even beyond ATE to other educators, and even those in industry to help them think a little bit more about accessibility and make sure that the resources and materials they're creating are more accessible. And we're doing that with the help of a group of experts and partners, including NCAM and the folks who are presenting today. So I'm going to turn it back over to Madeline, who's going to tell you a little bit more about NCAM.
Thank you, Rachel. So I'll just take one moment to let you know where we come from for perspective. At WGBH, which is a public broadcasting station that produces a lot of the primetime television content that's available from PBS, we also have a long history in making media accessible to people with sensory disabilities. We created closed captions and then established the Caption Center in 1972 to provide a service that captions television, home videos, feature films, CDs and DVDs, and also streaming video and webinars such as this one. And thank you to our captioner who's captioning us today. We also established something called Descriptive Video Service, which provides audio-described media for people who can't see. So for people who are blind or visually impaired, in the past, family members needed to whisper in their ear to tell them what was going on screen during a movie or a TV show, and that is a service that Descriptive Video Service provides using techniques from the theater world to make media accessible. And then finally, the National Center for Accessible Media is our R&D and policy wing. We do advocacy, we conduct research, and we develop new technical solutions and guidelines. So you'll hear today about the results of some of our work at NCAM. So we wanted to check in about whether folks are here from ATE projects or other. Everyone is welcome. Mike, do you want to bring up the next poll?
Yeah, there we go. So we just want to know where you're coming from, because we know some of you may be part of an ATE project or center. Some of you may have just submitted a grant. The grants were just due last week. And maybe you're at a non-ATE institution. Please feel free to share if we had an evaluator with us who may or may not be part of ATE. I wasn't sure. Yeah, and you may not know whether your institution has an AT grant, but if you don't have a project or a center yourself. Oh, this is somebody just said they're learning as they're moving into teaching online. Somebody said that they don't know if they're an AT institution, but they should be. Yes, Cheryl, you're right. We encourage you to apply for AT funding. Oh, Buffy just submitted an AT grant. That's great. Congratulations. Always feels good to have it in, to have your grant in. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mike. That's great.
Okay. So here are some examples of images, media images, video, taken from some ATE projects. And I know we just saw that lots of you are here from non-ATE projects, and that's fine. The focus here on these images is on science and technology projects, but the techniques that we'll be talking about are relevant for non-STEM courses and materials as well. So just some examples, you might be putting up diagrams of processes, or you might be showing data in bar graphs. You might also be offering images or videos showing process, showing people carrying out using tools or carrying out certain techniques. And all of these pieces of media will not be accessible to someone who can't see without special description. So we're going to start today by talking about description of still images, and then Brian is going to talk to you a bit about making video accessible both through description and through captioning. I'll just start by saying that you'll get this link, and it's repeated again later, but I wanted to say that the image description guidance I'm going to give you today is based on an NSF-funded project called Research on Effective Practices for STEM Description. So all of the advice that I'm going to give you today is backed by research which was done with members of the blind and visually impaired scientific community. As well, the Diagram Center guidelines that are up now took these STEM guidelines and added a lot of non-STEM content to them. So if you're from a non-STEM content area, you'll find lots of value to you in the Diagram Center as well. So our 4 big principles that came out of our research are as follows. First off, brevity. A person who is using computer speech to read your materials is inherently going through some more complexities in navigation and in reading. And you don't want to make their life any worse than you have to by having really long, meandering image descriptions. So the example on screen is a Venn diagram. And before we put up our project, a common way to describe this Venn diagram would be a whole paragraph about the circles, and where are the circles, and where is the rectangle, and what are the words, and what are the numbers. And the key here is to remember that this diagram is just one way of visualizing a set of data. And the key thing is to focus on what can you say as quickly as possible about the data and about how it's presented, and not focus on the visual presentation when that isn't important. So as I already mentioned, focusing on the data is key. And here's a really complex example. It's a colorful image of the carbon cycle. We see a purple mountain, a blue ocean, there's grass, there's trees, there's soil. But what's actually important, most important in this diagram is the numbers. So our suggested description for a complex diagram like this is to start with a couple of sentences laying out the visuals, not too much focus, but a little bit, so that if other users are talking about the image as a whole, you have a sense of it. But then to focus on the data. And that includes starting with a summary. 4 long arrows encircle the diagram representing the cycling of carbon. Smaller arrows illustrate storage of carbon and fluxes in carbon, and so on. And then the data itself, the numbers, are enclosed in a table. The table is sorted into 2 tables, one for storage and one for fluxes, as reflects the content. And this enables a student to get a quick overview first of what's in the image, but then if they need to do problem solving and data analysis based on the data, they've got that data right there, and it's organized so that they can use it. It's important that your description be clear. If a reader needs to listen to the description several times because it's poorly written or it's confusing, then that's not good accessibility. So it's important to be clear. And this illustration is a describer sitting at the beach meditating and reaching for clarity, because that's always hard to do. Finally, Drilldown Organization is our 4th principle. And that's illustrated in our carbon cycle diagram by the short intro at the top, a diagram titled Carbon Cycle, and then a brief description overview in the short paragraph, and then finally the tables. And this is relevant for many other kinds of descriptions as well. Always think about the user listening only as far as they need to hear, and then skipping off to look at the next thing. So if a user was reading a textbook and came across this image, the first thing they hear is the name of the image. If they know that they don't need carbon cycle information right now, they can skip ahead. So you want to start with something very simple. And then they can listen further and get more and more detail as they go. So we call that Drilldown Organization. And you can think of it as whether the user's just going to skim your first sentence or two, or whether they're going to stay around to listen to more detail. We also tackled a variety of complex image types, and we provide recommendations for ways to structure your description for the best navigational control. So what you don't want is long, rambly paragraphs, but sometimes a paragraph is the only way to approach a description. When you've got a data set such as a circle graph, bar graph, those kinds of things, generally those are best communicated as a table, sometimes even just a simple bulleted list, depending how much data is available. When you've got a complex flowchart or process graph, as shown in the middle here, we found that the most effective technique for this is nested lists, because a nested list gives a lot of organizational navigational control to the reader. They can feel they can sense the structure and the organization of the information because it's formally organized into a nested list. And then finally, sometimes all you can do is write up some sentences to describe a picture. But in our example on the right, we have 3 different images of early embryos from different species, and they need to be compared to each other. And so we wrote our description narratively, but with very specific ordering and structure so that a listener can compare each one to another, which we use comparative language, and we use consistent order of details within the paragraphs. And that converts what might otherwise be a bit of a narrative jumble into something with some structure. Math is a special case. Math is often presented online using images, and those images are inherently not going to be accessible. And so you have to do something to make the math accessible. If at all possible, we recommend using MathML markup. The MathML tools are well developed now and highly reliable. Your users may need a specific combination of browser and assistive technology to get that math, but it can be done. However, if for some reason the presentation form you're using can't support MathML, you will need to put in images with math in the image descriptions. And what you don't want to do is be ambiguous. So on the right side of the screen are 2 equations which, depending how you read them aloud, a user might not know which one you've got. Is it z equals 2 times the fraction parenthesis a plus b n parenthesis squared over c, or is it z equals 2a plus the fraction b squared over c? So I used very different words because if you use conversational English to describe math, you'll quickly find that it's ambiguous. And there are a few guidelines available online and some tools. One of the ones that's very long-standing but now digitized and available online is called the Handbook for Spoken Mathematics, or Larry's Speakeasy. So if you're creating math materials and need some guidance on saying it unambiguously, that's something you can look at. I apologize for my phone ringing. I'm going to mute myself while we take a few questions, and I'll unmute to answer them.
All right, well, we have a plethora of good questions here. I'm going to go back and start with Tony's question. He asked at the beginning, earlier on, how does one judge what level of accessibility is right or acceptable?
That's a great question, Tony. We could probably do an entire seminar just on that question. And so the overall answer is it needs to be at a level where students with disabilities can participate in an effective and timely manner. So if there is an assessment, students need to be able to answer that assessment. If there is a a material that the student needs to learn, there needs to be enough information that the student can really learn that information. There is obviously a set of web standards called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and that's certainly the place to start with making something accessible. But it is generally the case that it's difficult to make a fully 100% perfect accessible setup, and you need to make sure that you're focusing on the highest priority items. But maybe this would be a good idea for a future webinar focused on sort of decision making around accessibility.
That's a great idea.
Specific to image description.
Okay, so we have several. Cheryl asked, does the Diagram Center replace the older Talking Books guide for STEM images?
Yes, the Diagram Center is the new version of NCAM's effective practices. There was some talking book guidelines as well. The Diagram Center is sort of the newest omnibus. There is some slightly different material on the principles that was on the NCAM version of those guidelines, and unfortunately the NCAM website's in flux right now, but we should be able to make those available hopefully in the future.
Okay, so we have another question here, which is, hold on a second, whoops, lost my place, I'm scrolling back. Ruth asked, do we include text in images or avoid it?
Including text in images. So it's always better if you have text to provide it as real text so that screen reader users can read it directly. So if you're using images of text just to get a certain visual presentation and you can avoid that or do it with CSS instead, then that's definitely better to have the text be real text. However, when you have a diagram or a process or something where the text and the images really need to be married together, then obviously you can't avoid it. And in that case, what you want to do is make sure that the image description contains all of the text that was in the image so that you're not skipping over or abbreviating something that a sighted student is able to read.
And then Jennifer asked, that she really liked the diagram, and she's worked with colorblind folks before and wondered, how do we use that information when using colorful pictures?
That's a really good question. So I didn't approach issues of color blindness or color contrast here. You should obviously be testing for good color contrast, and there's lots of tools out there for that. For students who are colorblind, the important issue is whether they can distinguish different pieces of data from each other by a means other than just color. So on our screen, we have a colorful set of question marks, and in our case, we don't have any need to distinguish between them. But if we did, we might use textures or patterns. So if you have a bar graph with different colors for different data sets, you should make sure there's also a texture difference between the different bars. If you're doing a line graph, you can use dotted and dashed lines, or triangle versus square versus circle for the data points on a scatter plot. So always make sure when you're presenting data that the differences are not presented only as color, but that there's a texture difference or a shape difference as well. And then make sure that your legend represents that, because if your legend refers to different things in the image by color, then the legend won't be useful to users who can't distinguish between those colors.
Right, that makes sense. So the legend should have the same texture as whatever you're using in your image.
That's right.
That makes total sense. All right, and then Karen had asked, wondering if tables count as an image, and I would think they would.
Well, it depends how you're presenting your tables. If it's possible to make your tables be true HTML tables that you're presenting to all the students, then that's ideal. HTML table markup is highly accessible when done correctly, and there's resources out there on how to make sure you're using scope and headers correctly on your tables, so that a student with a screen reader can read that table straight off just like anybody else would. If it's a very complex table with multiple levels of headings, it can get complicated, and it may be useful to break it up into separate tables for each area, but overall tables are quite accessible. If, for whatever reason, the materials you're working with already have a picture of a table, and that picture of a table is not an HTML table, then you will need to give it an alternative. And in that case, your best bet is to create an HTML table and provide it as an alternative material for those who need it. So there's a technique called ARIA described by that can be used to point to another piece of HTML content that provides a detailed description of an image. When you have a short description of an image, you can fit it right into the alt text. But if you have a lot to say, or if you need to use structure like a table or a nested list, then in those cases you're going to need to use ARIA describe by, place that HTML elsewhere, and point to it so that screen reader users can find it. But if you're going to the effort to make that HTML table, it may be that it's possible to just use that in the materials as replace the image of the table with that, if you can.
Thank you so much. We have a little bit of back and forth here about, Krista asked, can you speak to why MathML is preferred over LaTeX or LA?
Yeah, LaTeX.
LaTeX.
So LaTeX is a typesetting language, and it's certainly true that a lot of STEM faculty are already writing materials in LaTeX. And that can be fine. A student can learn to listen to LaTeX. It's not necessarily intuitive because it's a formatting language rather than a mathematical language, but certainly many STEM students will learn to read LaTeX because that's the best way to get materials. And so they'll do that if they have to. MathML, if you're creating materials from scratch, may be better. There are also, I think, some utilities for converting between LaTeX and MathML, and so those would be worth looking into if you have a student who doesn't know LaTeX and needs materials converted.
And then finally, Laura had asked, are there any guidelines or guides for world languages? And I'm a little confused about what she's asking. Does that make sense to you, Madeline, or do we need more?
I know if you mean should the image description be presented in more than one language, then obviously that will depend on your audience and what you need. It looks like Laura's typing, and maybe we can take that question up again afterwards.
Do that. Why don't, let's move along here. I think
I can try to answer in the chat, Laura, if you can clarify.
Yeah, that sounds great. All right, so while we're working on the poll, Laura will clarify and Madeline will chime in as needed. So we would like to know if you all would be interested in training for your staff on this whole area of image description, and if so, what format that would be. So we could have a live online training with Q&A, an on-demand pre-recorded training, possibly a workshop at a future ATE PI meeting, which wouldn't help those of you not within the ATE community, or other. Again, go ahead and let us know in the chat box if you have other ideas about how you'd like to get this information. Ooh, we got an all of the above. That's what we'd like to hear. Okay. So lots of folks want that on-demand pre-recorded training, Madeline, which is interesting and is it's a real option, but there's definitely interest in our other options too. Just letting folks take a minute. All right. Well, thank you so much. I think Madeline is answering. She's been typing back and forth. All right. So let's move along here. I think. So we're going to talk now about video accessibility. I believe we are turning,
and we'll turn that over to Brian.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Hi, this is Brian Gould. I hope everyone can hear me. I've turned my mic up a little bit. So video accessibility, Madeline talked about still images, and video accessibility has some additional considerations for accessibility, certainly. There's really three areas that we need to be concerned about. One is sound, the other is video, and then the third is the player itself. So the accessibility solution we're all familiar with, captions, provides access for the audio for someone who can't hear it, or we all are familiar with lots of other uses for captions, and in fact many people who use captions or watch captioned videos do not have any hearing loss. So captions are not only a requirement, but they're useful beyond the intended audience. A great example of a curb cut effect there. Audio description is an additional track of audio narration that describes the key visual elements of a video, and that is for someone who can't see the screen or can't see the screen well. So that's audio and video. And then the player itself needs to be accessible for assistive technology such as a screen reader, or for a keyboard only user, someone who is not using a mouse. Some video players are quite accessible. The YouTube video player is accessible. HTML native browser players are quite accessible. And then there are the Able player, for example, is a specially made video player that enables lots of things, including the ability to toggle on and off a description track. So a second audio track which has description in it. And that's a pretty unique feature that's not available, certainly not in YouTube or in other um, video players that are out there. So the question is, how do we do these things? How do we create captions? How do we create audio descriptions? What's the tool we use to make to actually create that content so that our videos can be accessible? And this is the question that NCAM took up a few years ago, and we created Cadet, the caption and description editing tool. It is a free online tool that anybody can download and use. And we've created a video here that in which I'm going to describe and give you a demo of Cadet. And feel free to write in your questions or hold them to the end, and we'll have plenty of time for those as we get going. So we can go ahead and play a video that shows you Cadet.
Brian, excuse me, it's Mike. Should I launch that video now?
Yeah, that would be great,
I think
Mike.
so. And did we have one?
No, we can go ahead with the video now.
Yeah, we can go ahead. Yeah, I think
let's go
yep.
ahead.
Right. Colleagues, let me just remind you, I'll break in as moderator, that the majority of your web browsers will show this video. If you don't, it will be available on the recording as well. So here we go. We're going to launch that video now.
Hello, my name is Brian Gould, and I am a colleague of Madeline's here at WGBH NCAM, the National Center for Accessible Media. And what I'm going to be demoing for you today is Cadet, our caption and description editing tool, which is a piece of software that we created here at WGBH. WGBH is the creator of captions for television that we invented way back in the early 1970s, also audio description or audio narration for television. And we produce captions and descriptions every day here at WGBH in our production unit. But we know that there's many times when a video needs to be described and you may not be putting it up on YouTube or putting it up on Vimeo or another online video streaming service. And how do you caption it? You can spend thousands of dollars and buy professional captioning software, but that's not always the best solution. And you could temporarily put it privately up on YouTube and use their captioning tools. But we think that this is a good alternative. We've also, over the last couple of years, put in some neat little features and updates into Cadet. So it's becoming a fairly powerful tool for creating captions and descriptions. It's also completely free. It's also a web-based application. So what that means is you download Cadet itself and a little helper tool called Node, and that's very easy. And then you start it up and you can start captioning and describing. And I'll go through both of those processes in a second. I need to tell you that this works on Mac, this works on PC, this even works on Linux, and it works on all web browsers. Okay. So the first example I'm going to give is I'm going to go ahead and open some captions for a video that I have locally on my hard drive. So let's go ahead and just play, and you can see what captions on Cadet look like.
This blade has a dark past. It has shed much innocent blood. You're a fool for traveling alone so completely unprepared. You're lucky your blood's still flowing.
Okay, obviously we have a few errors in our captions here, but we will go ahead and fix that in just a moment. In fact, I can do that here. All of your typical text features are here, including cut and paste and editing and all those sorts of things. And I can just say, I know that instead of "you're lucky your wookeg is still flowing," it's "your blood is still flowing." And you can see that Cadet is rendering the captions on the fly as I make those changes, just like that. Okay, so how would I do something like this? That, you know, this is the end result. How would I do this from the beginning? Okay, so here we have a new caption project. I've opened the media, which is this. I've already done it. I've already queued us up to where we need to be. So let's go ahead. Now, typically, the way you would write captions is to write the transcript first. You would write, essentially, you would watch the program, listen to each line of dialogue, and write it down in the captions, and then do the timing later, and I'll show you exactly what that process looks like here. Okay, we'll go ahead and hit play.
This blade has a dark past.
Okay, so I've paused it, and I'm using a combination of on-screen buttons here and keyboard commands. All of those are explained in the help documentation. So this blade has a dark past. And I will go ahead and double carriage return, and that gives me a new caption instance. And we'll go ahead and play again.
It has shed much innocent blood.
It has shed much. Okay, so what we need to do is time these out so that we know when we want these captions to appear. So we'll go back to the beginning of this scene, and we'll go ahead and hit play, and I'm just going to hit a keyboard command, and that is going to populate the start time here. And we know we have caption 1, caption 2, start time, end time. Oh, and it will not be necessary to put an end time in for every caption, because Cadet's smart enough to know that if there's no end time, it will hold that caption up on the screen until the next start time comes up, and then it will remove one caption and load the next one. When you would need an end time is if you have someone saying something, if you said it has shed much innocent blood, and then there was no caption for 10 seconds or something like that. You wouldn't want that caption lingering on the screen, so you would go ahead and put an end time, and Cadet will then remove the caption when it's necessary, or when you've told it to. So let's go ahead and play.
This blade has a dark past. It has shed much innocent blood.
And it's as simple as that. All I've done is hit a keyboard command as it goes. I've thrown in the start times, and there we have it. If that's my entire script and I'm all done, I can go ahead and export it to a variety of caption types: WebVTT, SRT, QuickTime TTML, and everything else you could possibly
Colleagues, just a second here. We're going to adjust our screen. Hold on just a moment, please. I'm going to go back to the original presentation, and then we'll come back to the video and see if we can pick it up. Just a moment. Okay, hold on just one more moment.
Hello, my name is Brian Gould, and I am a colleague.
Brian, I think you'll be able...
For example, if there's been some...
Excuse me, Brian, I think you'll be able to move the slider. Do you know about where we were?
Yes, I think I can. Oh, so here it is. Back a little bit.
Yeah, there you go. That's about right. Thank you, Brian.
And do that process of timing it out again. So we'll queue up our, we have to open our media, of course. And that's going to be this movie. And we're going to move us up to where we need to be. And we'll go ahead and start and do this process again.
This blade has a dart.
Okay, so I know that I want to split up these captions. I'm in edit mode, so I can go back in here and hit a carriage return there. And now I have two captions. And I know I want to split up this section because that's a lot to read in one caption instance. So I'll go ahead and turn that into two captions. So let's keep going.
Past. It has shed much innocent blood. You're a fool for traveling alone so completely unprepared. You're lucky your blood's still flowing. Thank you.
Okay. So what else can we do with Cadet? We can offset time codes. So if you've created this and then somebody has put a trailer on the top of it or put credits on the top or whatever and it needs to be offset, you can go ahead and add the seconds or minutes or frames that it needs to be offset, and we'll go ahead and either offset a portion. For example, if there's been some internal editing and you have to offset from one point to the end, or if you have to offset the entire video, you can do that as well. You don't have to manually change any time codes. You can, of course, everything is manipulable in here, so you could turn this back to 30 if you wanted to. You can also, of course, go in here and make any changes you need to. Okay, here we are again with our caption script. Now for descriptions, audio descriptions, which are, of course, an additional track of audio narration that describes the characters and the action and the scenery and the costumes for someone who can't see the screen. It's a similar process, although almost a mirror opposite, in which when you have a caption, of course, there's someone speaking, and it's in the silence between lines of dialogue where you would insert audio description so that it's a natural flowing between dialogue and description, dialogue and description. So what's great about Cadet is that you can take your captioned script and you can go ahead and convert that to a description script. So what has it done here? So this is our description mode. And you can see the button here is pressed for description. And of course we have a number for each instance of description. We have a start time. An end time is very important for description, and I'll show you why. And then it's taken the caption and automatically created that as the cue so that we know when the last line of dialogue is spoken before a description needs to be read. Now, what Cadet is going to create is a script that can be then taken into a studio and used to record audio description. Okay. So that's the point for this. It's a very useful tool for writing audio description scripts or audio narration scripts. So let's go ahead and play.
This blade has a dark past. It has shed much innocent blood.
So we might not need a description there. I'll just go ahead and delete that, and I'll say he pours soup for Sintel. We know this character's name is Sintel. We can go to the review mode and back up a little bit. And this is very helpful. So as we're playing, we can read our descriptions out loud.
It has shed much innocent blood.
He pours soup for Sintel.
You're a fool.
So that's the description. And here's a couple helpful tools. We know the media time, where we are in the video. So here, Cadet is telling us that the pause time, the time between lines of dialogue, is almost 4 seconds, and we wrote something that is 2.4 seconds long. And this is really, really helpful. And in fact, if I got a little more verbose, who watches him pour the soup, which you would never write in description because why? We get a warning. This turns red, we get a little note, and it says, hey, note, your description's almost 5 seconds long and you only have 4 seconds. So here's a completed description script, audio narration script, for this movie we've been watching, Sintel. And we have each instance of description, a start time and end time. Cadet is telling us how long the pause time is, how much we've written, and whether or not we go over. And we have an audio cue for the narrator to know when they should begin speaking, which is upon fade up. And then they will read, in animation, mist hangs over snow-capped mountains. And we have a variety of export styles. We can go right to description script, and that gives you a very nice clean readout with start times, end times, your audio cue, and your description in nice bold text for your narrator to read. Okay, I think I've shown you most of what Cadet can do with captions and descriptions. I have one more trick up my sleeve, and that is to show you presentation mode. This is for the situation where you have a video and you want to show it usually with description, but you haven't had time to record a description script, for example. So let's do that. We're going to turn our captions off because this is specifically about descriptions, and we'll go ahead and just play.
In animation, mist hangs over snow-capped mountains. Our view weaves among the craggy peaks. Titles appear. The Blender Foundation presents the Durian Open Movie Project, a Blender Institute production. This film was supported by the Netherlands Film Fund. On a ridge, a figure trudges through the snow, using a long pole to steady her steps. The slim teenage girl leans into the wind, clutching her leather collar close around her neck. A bandit attacks. The girl blocks his spear with her pole. It breaks in half.
Exciting! For many reasons. Not only is Sintel attacked by a bandit, but we had actual description being spoken to us. How did that happen? Well, I am good at accents, but not that good. What Cadet is doing is reaching out to a text-to-speech engine, an open source one, and in real time rendering the text that you have here in your description area and rendering it in speech. And what presentation mode allows you to do is to present the video with that type of description, if that's what works for you. And so you don't have to have a human go in and record it. Now you are limited here because this is for live presentation only. There's no way to record that voice. But if you have Cadet, you can use it as a presentation tool. So I think I've shown you everything that you would want to know about Cadet, how to create captions, how to ingest transcripts and create captions out of them, how to create captions from scratch, similarly how to create descriptions from scratch, and also how to take a caption file and convert it into basically a framework for creating descriptions, and then how to present descriptions with a text-to-speech engine that's automatically that works in conjunction with Cadet. The only other thing I want to show you is that you can do all of those things not only with a video that's housed locally, but with one that is already online. We'll go ahead and open a URL, and we'll go to YouTube, and now there's just a hole in Cadet that is playing, that has inserted this YouTube player in it, and we'll go ahead and play, and no surprise to anyone, it's Sintel. And now I can use this YouTube video to create my captions or descriptions. Cadet will create all the time codes that you will need for that, and overlay, so I can just write captions begin here, and I can rewind, and I can go ahead and play. And there we have it. So it will create the captions here. Now this is just overlaying the captions there. It's not actually on YouTube with the captions that I'm writing. Of course, you would have to export these captions and then put them back together in YouTube. But if it's a video that you have created or you have the rights to, Cadet is a nice alternative to the caption editing experience that YouTube offers. One other production process you could use is that if you have a video that you do have up on YouTube, you could use Google's automated captioning process to create sort of a first pass script. You know there's going to be mistakes, and you know that the timing might be a little off. So you can use that. You can download it and inhale it into Cadet and use Cadet to clean it all up because it's an alternative to the YouTube caption editing environment. So I think that's it for Cadet, and now I will leave my little presentation here and come back.
All right, that was great. It was so nice to be able to see the Cadet in use there. I think we have a quick poll for everybody, just because we're curious about how many videos all of you create each year. And I know Brian has been trying to answer all of your questions in chat, which is great. All right, so a lot of people are saying that video is an important component of their work project. Yeah, so quite a few. Wow. All right, so that's good for us to know, just as we're thinking about the community and thinking about offering more information. We're going to provide you, obviously, with the slides. You'll have that whole video to watch again, and obviously you can learn more about Cadet on NCAM's site. All right, thanks, Mike. That was great. I think we got things a little bit backwards here. Okay, so I think any one final question about video that anybody would like to ask? I'm looking back to see. I think we've gotten everything covered.
This is Brian. There was one question I haven't gotten to, which had to do with whether or not you can play the description track and basically the soundtrack at the same time.
Yeah.
And that depends on the video player. So, for example, YouTube, you can have a video with one soundtrack. So you can either have an open described video, or you can provide two versions of the video, one without description and one with description. The Able player is a different video player that does allow you to provide two audio tracks, one with description, one without. And then, as you saw, Cadet itself has a presentation mode where you could play that text-to-speech description voice with the soundtrack integrated like that. So it really depends on the player less than what Cadet is providing.
Okay, great. All right, I'm just going to move us along here. I know these are some resources that Madeline, you were going to just sort of go over for folks really quickly.
Sure. So just to repeat, to have it in one place, a link to the Diagram Center version of the image description guidelines, a link to Cadet, which is at ncamftp.wgbh.org/cadet. And I also wanted to mention we've got a series of video tutorials on how to use Cadet. If you go to YouTube and search for WGBH Cadet tutorial, we've got 3 up so far, and I have a list of ideas for more tutorials we'd like to provide. So if you're using Cadet, there's help documentation in a document online, and then there's also these video tutorials available. So as you think about your next steps for what you'd like to do to improve accessibility in your projects and in your content materials, we wanted to let you know how to reach us. If you have specific questions, we may be able to help at ncam@wgbh.org or finding resources. Also, we're on Twitter at AccessWGBH and on Facebook at Access Media Access Group. And then I think Rachel's going to tell you a little bit more about how to be in touch with ATE.
Absolutely.
With Access ATE.
So you can visit us. We have a very basic website up at this point. We're still in the first year of a 4-year project, so that will improve over time. accessate.net. You can email us for any information you'd like about the work that we're doing or how to get in touch with our various partners. And you can join us for events like this, for webinars. We'll be having live events, including the Access AT Universal Access Lab at the PI conference if you'll be there in October. And then one of the things that is very important to us as part of an NSF-funded community is to get feedback from you about how you find these sorts of presentations. So we would love it if you would take a survey. Mike is opening that up, and it should open in a new window for you. He'll also put the URL in the chat window. We really want to thank the folks from NCAM today. I learned a huge amount myself, and it was very, very helpful. I will mention one more time that you will be getting a link to the slides and to the webinar, the recorded webinar itself. So you'll have all that information in the next couple of days. And I know that if you have questions, you can get in touch with NCAM directly, or you're always welcome to get in touch with me and I will pass things along. So again, thanks so much, everybody. It was great to have you all with us today.
Colleagues, we had a problem opening the survey, so please look for your email where we'll send you the links to the recording and the slides. Please look for a link to that survey too. Sorry about that. Rachel will manage this. I'm sure everyone, once they get that email from us, will also respond to the survey as well.
That would be great, folks.
Rachel, Rachel, Madeline, and Brian, thank you very much for the presentation today, and WGBH captioners, thank you for all the effort in providing the captioning as well. This ends the audio portion of our webinar, and we'll leave the system open for a few minutes. Thank you.